Books of Blood came out on Hulu this week, and I didn't do any research into what this show was about ahead of time. I just thought it looked interesting. And then after I watched it, I kind of looked into it a little bit more and was very interested in what I found. The tagline for this show is just three tales tangled in space and time. Basically is just, it's a movie, it's not a show. So it's a movie with three different stories, but they all kind of connect in some way. I did enjoy it, and I would recommend it. So I'm about to get into some spoilers if you haven't seen it. Then fair warning. So the beginning of the movie says that this was a book from 1984 that terrified people. I didn't know if this was, a part of the movie or if this is actually based off of a book. At that point, I had no idea. A man is in a bookstore and another man comes in. I guess he'd had some shady dealings with, and his throat is slit. But before his throat is slit, he tries to buy his way out of his impending death by telling this guy about a book of blood. So he tells the guy, but the guy kills him anyway. So the killer gets back into a car that's being driven. It's like a getaway car. And he tells the driver, we're going to go get this book of blood. So then we're introduced to a girl named Jenna. Jenna has got some problems, and she's home from college. She's been through some things, and she's off her medication. She's not well, and she's staying with her mother and her mother's boyfriend in a beach house. She's very, very sensitive to noises, so she wears earphones at all times. Chewing noises, any just random noises, just eats at her. So her mom is very not supportive and basically is going to send her back to a hospital. And Jenna hears this and goes into their room with scissors, apparently intent on killing them, but decides to steal their money instead and run away. So she feels as though she's being followed. At this point, we don't know if it's real or in her head, but she gets on a bus to go to Los Angeles. And when she sees this man who she thinks is following her, she abruptly gets off the bus and winds up in this spiderweb cafe, I think it's called. And she's trying to find a place to stay for the night. And she gets on, I guess, this movie's version of Airbnb called Go and Sleep. There's one place for her to stay. And when she gets there, she starts having hallucinations. The next day, she goes back to the spiderweb cafe to meet this guy, Gavin, who was also staying at this inn. But he never shows up, and as she's going to go get more coffee, she turns around and sees this guy who's been following her. So she runs back to the house where she's been staying and decides to stay for longer. So she's in her room and hears scratching on her wall, and somehow gains access to the wall and finds a mummified woman inside of her wall. So she starts texting Gavin, and she's getting replies from Gavin. But the old woman who is running the inn has Gavin's phone, and something apparently horrible has happened to Gavin, and the old woman is pretending to be Gavin. So Jenna is telling him, call the police, oh my gosh, murder, I'm in trouble. So Jenna escapes the room, knocks crazy woman over the head, and is trying to find an escape route. And she finds underneath these stairs boarded up, and she goes in and she runs through these people on either side that are being held captive. And to me, that is straight out of People Under the Stairs. I think it was called People Under the Stairs. It was a Wes Craven movie from the 90s. It was always seemingly always on TV, and it was so unsettling to me, but I always watched it. It was so messed up. You'll have to, if you are watching this video and you saw that movie, please comment and let me know if you saw it and what you thought of it. And if it scarred you as much as it scarred me, because that was a traumatic movie, and I need to watch it again and probably do a video on it because I haven't seen that movie in years and I have a love-hate relationship with it. But that scene was so reminiscent of The People Under the Stairs. So already I'm getting nostalgic vibes from like the 80s, 90s anthology horror setup. And then we've got I don't know if they meant for this to be a nod to The People Under the Stairs, but it definitely reminded me of that movie. Jenna gets captured by this couple, and we realize that they're like what their plan was. They even have their own daughter and grandchildren held up mummified like these other people. They don't want anybody to ever leave them, and this woman used to be a nurse and she would do mercy killings as well before she was forced into early retirement. They're about to take Jenna's eyes when there's a knock at the door, and it's the man who has been following Jenna, so we know she hasn't been hallucinating that. He won't go away because he's saying, I never saw her leave here and I'm looking for her. So the woman invites him in and knocks him over the head. And as this is happening, Jenna is, the medicine that she was given, the drugs that she was given are starting to wear off, and she's able to run out of the house. So she's trying to find a way to escape and quickly gets into a car out front because she's trying to escape. But then she doesn't have the fob, so the car won't move. And then the couple comes out of the house carrying the body of the man who they've just killed because they're going to dispose of his body. So she jumps in the back seat. They take this long drive to a quarry, and the crazy guy puts the man they killed in the driver's seat, and then throw a rock on the gas and make it appear as if he has driven off this cliff, and she's still in the back seat bracing herself, and we assume that she's died because this episode ends there. So that leads us to the second story. In the second story, we see a woman watching a weird tape of a naked man on the floor, surrounded by blood on a wall. Not just blood on a wall, blood writing on the wall. This woman's name is Professor Mary Florensky, and we see in a flashback that she has a son who was dying of cancer, which again, these people just get you in the feels. Like, what is, it's just, I feel like everything I watch now is just like, let's just kill your soul with some sad story of a kid dying in some terrible way. Like, okay. So, this woman, I get, she reminds me of this actress that I loved. She was the mom in Poltergeist, the Steven Spielberg Poltergeist from the 80s, Jo Beth Williams. She reminds me so much of her. When we see her in the hospital with her son Miles, he's asking her, where do they go when they die? And she just tells him that they go to sleep. And then he delivers this heartbreaking line where he says that what does he say? He just says he wants to be near her. Heartbreaking. So then, sometime later, we see Mary going into her office, and there's a man in her office who claims to have been sent there by her son. His name is Simon. He is the naked dude with all the blood scribbling around him. And he calls himself the speaker for the dead. So she's a skeptic. She doesn't believe Simon can do what he says that he can do. So she puts him to the test with, I guess, a bunch of other graduate students. They're conducting this test to see if he's lying. So they put him, they're behind this glass where they can see in, and all the lights go out. You hear this screaming, and then when the lights come back on, he's seizing on the floor, and there's all this blood scribble on the walls, and it's supposedly messages from the dead. And you see this one part of the wall where it says, "I'm not asleep, Mommy." And she's pretty much convinced right then and there. When Simon goes to Mary's house and also tells her that Miles said that he just wants to be near her, she recognizes those as some of the last words that he had said to her. But then as time goes on, Simon starts feeling the pressure when Mary wants to basically make what he does into a business and write books on it and study it. He feels the pressure and cracks and reveals to her, after she finds him in bed with another woman in her house, that it was a con job, that he actually knew her ex-husband, who was an alcoholic, through AA. And this was a con that he pulled with her husband, and her husband had fed him this information. Mary is in Miles's room, and she's very heartbroken because she thought that her son was still with her, and she starts to see that there's writing on a board manifesting itself right in front of her in her son's room, and it says, "Bring him to us." And she sees him laying in his bed. So now he is appearing to her. And so she downplays her rage and gets Simon to stay because she's going to bring him to Miles and the other ghosts that he's pissed off. So she has the investors over again and gets Simon to go upstairs to Miles's room and tells the investors that he's going to do I think she called it a convocation. And she closes the door and they stand outside of the room and they hear similar screams, and he's, being torn apart. And when it's over, they open the door back. He has no hair. He's all carved up on his body. It's not on the walls. That's pretty much the end of that episode. So then that leads us to, that story number 2. So then story number 3, we're brought back to the 2 guys from the first story, the guy who was driving the getaway car and the guy who killed the guy, I don't have names. I didn't write down names. It didn't seem very important. The guy who slit the bookstore guy's throat, and then the getaway car driver guy, we're brought back to them in the 3rd story. They're at a coffee shop trying to buy coffee, and they have misplaced their wallets, and they basically tell the barista that if he doesn't give them the coffee, they're going to kill him. So he's like, "Coffee's on the house, here you go, you can take it, it's fine." So in the first story, when we see Jenna getting off the bus and making her way to the cyber cafe, she's almost hit by a car. So, and I figure, I could tell, it's obvious that it's them. But then when we're in story 3, we see it from their perspective where they almost hit her. So this is another example. Have I given another example? This is an example of how the stories are intertwined. So the 2 men are on their way to find the Book of Blood, and they stop their car somewhere, or their car stops, and one guy gets out to investigate and try and get it start working again. The getaway driver guy sees his dead mother and is lured into this church. He's in some kind of a trance, and he shoots himself in the head. So he was compelled to kill himself. And then when the other guy goes outside, his car, Christine style, just comes alive and tries to kill him. So he runs into Mary Florensky's house, and she is now an old woman, but Simon has not aged, and he is still very much carved up, because as more people die, more messages get carved into his body, because he is the Book of Blood. The Book of Blood is a person, it's not actually a book. His body is the book. So Mary calls herself the reader, So, okay, actually, I do have the name of this guy. The guy who slit the bookstore guy's throat in the beginning. His name is Kenneth. And so he is compelled to stab himself in the stomach because Mary says that Kenneth is going to become a part of the book. He's going to tell a story because he's going to be dead very soon. And Kenneth says, no, I'm not. So after Kenneth has stabbed himself, he happens upon the crazy old couple's house. And at the time, the inopportune moment that he comes up is when the man is dragging Gavin after he's already sewn up his eyes and his mouth, and I think his ears too, and is like, what's going on? And then the crazy woman comes and beats him over the head. And when Jenna is initially trying to escape in the first story, she runs into the shed and sees the guy who had been carved up, like with a chainsaw. And we realize now that it was Kenneth, because after he was hit, he got chainsawed. So now we find Jenna in the hospital, and we learn that she did not die in the car accident. And we see a flashback to who the man actually was who was stalking her. And it turns out that he was the father of a boy that Jenna was dating in college. And we learn that Jenna is pretty evil because the boy's dad said that the boy, when he died, was on the phone with Jenna. And we learn that Jenna was trying to get him to kill himself, saying that she was going to do the same thing separate from him, but they would do it together over the phone. All the while she's sitting in her bed trying to compel him to kill himself. Does this sound familiar? This sounds so much like a real life case. And now I need to Google it. Literally, I typed in girl tells boyfriend, or girl, I think I only typed in girl tells, and then the second suggestion is girl tells boyfriend to kill himself. Michelle Carter. So Conrad Roy is the boy who killed himself. This happened in 2014. And this one made waves. This one was a pretty big deal because she didn't kill him, but she compelled him to do it. And she did get prison time. I think that she only had to do a very, very short time, like a matter of months in prison for it. So as Jenna is remembering this, she starts crying and realizes that real life is too much for her, or these memories are too much, and she doesn't want to live anymore, but she's not going to kill herself. So instead, she goes back to the old couple's house and submits herself to have her eyes and ears sewn shut and to be put in a coffin underneath the house, because that's better than any other alternative, I guess, in her mind. As I said, this reminds me a lot. So that's the end. That's the end of the third episode. That's the end of the movie. As I said, this does remind me of 80s and 90s anthology horror. So I decided to look up the Book of Blood, and saw that it was a 2009 movie as well, and it was based off of Clive Barker's work, which I knew that a lot of his stories had been made into movies like Hellraiser and Candyman. But I knew that it was based off of a book of short stories, which I guess is called The Book of Blood. I didn't know. I watched Hellraiser sometimes when I was a kid. It was very unnerving, and I got bad feelings when I watched it. It was not a favorite of mine, but I had seen it. Same thing with Candyman. Candyman, I feel like, was pretty famous in the 90s, and then they're bringing it back next year. I don't know how many kids these days really know of Candyman. I don't know how famous. I don't know how it's endured. But in the 90s, Candyman was pretty scary. And so I was aware of all these, but I wasn't a fangirl over them like I was. If you know anything about me, you know that I love Nightmare on Elm Street. That's my favorite film franchise, and Nightmare on Elm Street 4 is my favorite film of all time. That might be very random. That's fine. But I loved that movie when I was a kid, and it's my all-time favorite movie. So I'm not going to apologize for it. So I'm learning that I actually am very interested to learn more about Clive Barker, because what I learned about him just through his Wikipedia, he's been through some things. He has had a life. And going back to the point that of the 80s and 90s anthology horror, one of his stories, which is called The Yattering and the Jack, was made into an episode from Tales from the Dark Side. Just the intro alone to that show is terrifying. I want to actually find the episodes and rewatch them. They used to be available on YouTube. I think the only option you have right now is to buy them on DVD or Blu-ray. At some point they were available to stream, at least for you to buy episodes to stream, but they're currently unavailable. Probably something to do with licensing. But I would love to watch those again. But it's funny that he had one of his stories turned into an episode for that show. Let me know if anybody's watching this video. Let me know if you have seen Tales from the Dark Side, and if you liked it, if it gave you weird feelings like it gave me. Because they were scary, but they were also campy and just kind of grotesque and just dark. So the 2009 movie of Book of Blood was mainly focused on one story, and the 2020 version of Book of Blood, the one about Simon and Mary and Miles, is the most similar to the story in the original movie, which is closer to the original short story, except in the 2009 version, I don't think that there's a son, and the names are a little bit different, but a lot of the details are similar. So now I need to watch the 2009 movie. And the 2020 movie was executive produced by Seth MacFarlane, the Family Guy guy. So that's it for that, but I've actually, through this movie, as I said, I'm now inspired to look further into Clive Barker and his stories, his movies, his life. So maybe I'll do I'm like freaking myself out. Actually, last night I did creep myself out. I don't remember if it was from Evil, the movie, the show Evil on Netflix, or Monsterland, or the Book of Blood, but I think I'm watching too much of this stuff because I'm getting freaked out in the dark. And because I'm sitting here in Vivi's room and I have the lights off, I just have this light on and the blinds are partially up, and I just keep hearing things out there. And I'm like, and it's also 11:45, so I have to go. But let me know if you watched this movie, or if you plan to watch it, what you thought about it. Have you seen Hellraiser and Candyman? And what's your favorite thing to watch in October for Halloween? Like, there's so many questions. I'm so enthusiastic for this season that I don't know. Let me know if you love Halloween too. But I gotta go because I need to finish eating my Panda Express and get ready to go to bed so I can take care of my 1-year-old tomorrow. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.